So, Materialists, which, as I said before, you did a brilliant interview with Celine Song for last week's interview. And I have, honestly, it was the meeting of minds of all time. I was thinking, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a filmmaker in which they agreed so fully with what I was saying.
When I first walked in to the interview and I was introduced to her, I said, look, every single person that's come out has said that you're really lovely. And so I just want to say the pressure's all on you.
Well, you can listen to that interview by downloading last week's show if you haven't already. So, Materialists, this is the new film from Celine Song, who made Past Lives, which was my favourite film of the year that it came out. Past Lives was a depiction of a love non-triangle. It's sort of a story about how relationships change over time, about how relationships define identity, and what does it mean or what doesn't it mean to be fated. This is also about relationships, but not so much about love, but more specifically about dating. And in that interview that you did, Celine Song said it's about the dating market, okay? So Dakota Johnson is Lucy, who is a matchmaker in New York. She works at a company called Adore. She's got a top-notch success rate. Her clients get married. She's also single. She says that she's either going to marry someone wealthy or die alone. She meets Pedro Pascal's high-flying financier. Correct me if any of these things you think are wrong. Incidentally, Sanj, do leap in. And she thinks he'd be perfect for her portfolio. But then she does the thing, she breaks the rule about, don't sample the merchandise, that she sort of starts to have a relationship with him. Rather than putting him on the books, he becomes, potential partner. Meanwhile, her ex, Chris Evans, is a cater waiter. And we learn that one of the reasons that she broke up with her ex was that they were broke. And that she is a materialist, and that material things do matter to her, as does the idea or the concept of love. Here is a clip.
When I see your face, I see wrinkles, gray hair, and children that look like you. Can't help it. But as your friend, I would tell you it's a bad idea to be with a 37-year-old cater waiter who still has roommates. I would say you definitely shouldn't marry a guy that has $2,000 in his bank account in a city he can't afford, who's only still there to keep trying to be a theater actor because someone told him he was good at it once.
And yet you can hear from his voice that, he's got something. So in that interview, a couple of nuggets from that interview. So Celine Song said, everyone thinks that Lucy's an expert in love. She isn't. She's only an expert in dating. She also said that the film was inspired by her own experiences working in a dating agency while trying to be a playwright, and said that she learned more in that brief time about what people want, than, a lifetime of experience. And she compares the job to being a stockbroker, in which relationships are like there's a stock market in which things have value. And she talks a lot in that interview about the idea of valuing somebody in terms of their height, their weight, their income, their age. And obviously that seems completely at odds with the elusive idea of love. And in fact, the film opens with a sequence in which we see like a couple from an ancient time, apparently, having a love bond at the very beginning. So this idea is that this has been going on, all the way through, mankind has been looking for love. So it's about the merchandising of the idea of affection and the way in which we objectify ourselves and we objectify other people. And obviously that objectification ends in what Celine Song calls dehumanization. She also talked a lot in that interview, people really should listen to that interview, about wealth is control, the idea that love is only for the wealthy in this dating world. She says it's the great drug of our time. Why do we do Instagram of our food? It's because it's expensive. And so all these things, these are things that play right into all my kind of, yeah, fine, well done, ticking all the right boxes. I actually think the most piercing line in the film is when there's a line when somebody says that what they want or what they get is the idea of feeling valued and feeling valuable, and it's a very double-edged sword, because the whole point about this thing is, well, what is value in this market? So the message of the film is, look, we're not merchandise, we're people, which is very close to, we are the world, we are the children. it's a strange experience for me because I loved Past Lives, okay, and I thought Past Lives was really piercingly melancholic. I thought this was much more broadly in the kind of in the rom-com area. I remember when I reviewed Past Lives, I compared it to Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love and Richard Linklater's Before trilogy, and David Cho's Return to Seoul, and Nora Ephron, and even a bit of Tokyo Story. This is much more in the Nora Ephron school. There's a fantastical element to it. There is a dramatic element to it. It feels like a played drama, as opposed to Past Lives, which felt like you were actually watching something completely convincing playing out on screen. Again, in your interview, Celine Song referred to that thing that in Jane Austen novels, for example, one of the ways out of material straits is through marriage, and that then continues. So, I mean, I think she's a brilliant filmmaker. I liked the film a lot. I thought that it had so many, very, very well observed things about this thing about, merchandise, commodification, dehumanization, all that sort of stuff. I have to be honest, it didn't pierce my soul in the same way that Past Lives did. I liked it very much, and I thought it was a really smart, well-written, well-played, slightly bittersweet rom-com with much more of a kind of, almost a sort of, a fantastical underlay to it. But saying it's not like Past Lives, it's like that very famous thing, I've said this so many times, that Joseph Heller was interviewed after he'd written Was It Something Happened? And the interviewer said, "You'll never write anything as good as Catch-22." And he said, "Few people will." I mean, saying that something isn't as good as Past Lives is not saying it isn't really good. I'm really fascinated to know because I know you've seen both those films. Where does it sit for you in relation to Past Lives?
I mean, I wonder, when you were just talking then, I wonder, Past Lives, I think to a Western audience is less familiar. That whole notion of, fatalism. And I mean, I think that's worked into the culture. It's one of the things that I didn't have enough time to talk to Celine Song about, was just, where, in terms of her cultural background and experience, how did that inform elements of the film in terms of Materialists? Because I think that notion of, of matchmakers and trying to kind of arrange a deal is not dissimilar to how arranged marriages worked.
Yeah.
People would, families would do all of that and say, well, how tall is he? How much does he earn? How tall is she? What's her education, etc. And they would do that anyway. So that part of it didn't feel alien to me. I mean, when I went to see the screening, there were a couple of other people who, as they were coming out, were talking about how cynical they thought the film was. It was a very cynical take on dating. And I thought, no, it isn't for me. I mean, that's just what has always happened, which is what is suggested in the film. Whereas I think Past Lives are that whole notion of fatalism and the fact that, it was taking place in Korea. There was a kind of otherworldness about it that this doesn't have. This is much more familiar. Yeah. Also, it's in New York, which, as you said, from everything from When Harry Met Sally to Hannah and Her Sisters and, and a dozen other rom-coms is familiar to us.
Yes.
As a city and setting it there. I really, really loved it, actually. I think that, one of the things about art, I think that came up in the conversation with her, was that, when you look at art, any kind of art, you kind of value it for what it gives to you, the feelings it gives to you, as opposed to someone tells you how much it's worth. And you go, my God, this is wonderful. And the thing with this film was that it has, by the end of it, I felt really good. I felt really nice. I felt happy. And whenever I've thought back to it, and the soundtrack is brilliant as well. I think there's some great needle drops in there. And also I think that Celine Song is a very lean director. There's very little in the film that I thought was kind of wasted in terms of shots, in terms of angles, etc. So the more I've thought about it, and every time I do think about it, I just end up feeling very, very happy.
But I agree with that, and I'm slightly surprised that somebody would say it's a cynical take. It's not. I think it's not cynical. I mean, I think it is there's an element of romantic fantasy about it. I mean, even when you look at the poster and that kind of very posed image of the three of them, that tells you immediately this is a different world to the world of Past Lives. And actually, I suppose maybe I want more cynicism. But then I say that, and I absolutely love Nora Ephron. And one thing you could never call Nora Ephron was cynical. I mean, you can say about When Harry Met Sally, and I think there is some of When Harry Met Sally in this. One thing you say about When Harry Met Sally is it's romantic, but it's also very, very clear-eyed about that central thing about, can men and women ever be friends, or does the sex part always get in the way? And, I had the privilege of interviewing Nora Ephron a couple of times, and there was nothing dewy-eyed about the way in which she viewed human relationships, but she had a way of writing that had that kind of magical New York fairy dust, or whatever you want to call it. And I mean, I like the fact this is called Materialists, and it is about materialism, and its central character is somebody who is avowedly materialistic. What does that mean? One criticism I would have, I really could have lived without the sequence at the beginning establishing the this is what love has always been like through the ages. I thought that was a misstep. I thought that stuck out like a sore thumb. What did you think?
I didn't mind it. I mean, it comes back to it to round it off. I suppose there's different ways of kind of suggesting that. There may be other ways of doing it, but
not
as I
doing
said,
it.
Or not doing it. I mean, but overall, as I said, when I got to the end of the film, it really was about, well, what feeling has it left me with?
Yes, and the feeling is happiness.
Yeah, it's joy.
Well, that, Sanj, is a 5-star review.